Okay, we are live. Yeah, Larry, no talking. At least no talking. Let me first do the introduction. You know, like the newscast. I'll lead and you feed.
Put on a few years.
So, all right. So this week's parsha talks about Yaakov returning from the land of Haran. He dealt with his father-in-law. He has 4 wives, 12 kids, 11 boys, 1 girl. And in the beginning of the parsha, he's very nervous about him meeting his brother Esau for the first time, and he sends him.
4 wives?
Yeah.
Give or take.
Don't give anything.
Not with 4 wives.
No, it was Black Friday, and it was like buy one get. It's like Costco. He bought it, in bulk.
He got it whole thing.
Exactly, yeah. And he's very nervous about his whole interaction with Esau, and he sends him a gift, and he prays to God. He prepares for war. In the end, the meeting goes very well. Esau hugs him and kisses him, and they make up. And Esau says, "Come on, let's hang out together. We'll go together." Yaakov says, "Listen, he's afraid. Esau today likes me. Tomorrow he's going to hate me." See, Yaakov tells Esau, "You go your way. I got little kids. I'll go my thing. You want to go paintball shooting. My kids want to go to Disneyland. It's not the same. Not the same vacation." So, and everything seems to be okay. Yaakov comes, and in this parsha is the second recorded purchase of land in the Holy Land. The first one is Avram buying the cave of Machpelah. Now, this is the second recorded purchase. This is Yaakov purchases the city of purchases the city of Shechem, or not. I don't know the whole city. He doesn't purchase the city. He purchases a plot near the city, which today that plot is the burial place of Yosef and his 2 sons Ephraim and Manasseh. Not a very safe place to go today. But
Where is it again?
Nablus.
Nablus.
Yeah.
Okay, we've been there.
Oh yeah. Yeah. So
Ages ago.
yeah. I've also now it's a little bit more sketchy neighborhood. What did someone say? Israel's a great place, just a bad neighborhood, right? So I don't mean to scare you guys. Really. No, it's a great place to go. Anyway, so everything seems to be going well. He's making his way to his father in Hebron, which is not too far, and all of a sudden disaster strikes. What happens? Dinah's walking around the city of Shechem. The city of Shechem was named after the founder. The founder of the city was a guy. His name's Hamor. He named the city after his son Shechem, so we'll call him the prince, I guess. Shechem sees Dinah, very beautiful. He kidnaps her, violates her, and then he decides to add insult to injury. He goes to Yaakov. He says, "I want to marry your daughter." Now, when the boys heard about this, and the older brothers heard about this, they were very upset. One of my favorite verses in the Torah to read is this week's parsha. It says, "Ki nevala aseh b'Yisrael," because a nevala is an abomination was done in Israel, and it's just not done. You don't treat Jewish girls this way. And they come and they say, "Oh, we'd love to marry, with your people and do business and commerce, but we're circumcised, and to us, you got, uncircumcised people are very low. In fact, before all the Gentiles started getting circumcisions, the way Jews would refer to Goyim was Arelim, uncircumcised one.
Uncut.
It was considered like not derogatory, but like dismissive. You know what I'm saying? Impure, very impure. You can't say it these days. These days we call them goyim. We call them this light's gonna die. We call them goyim. We call them shkotzim, whatever you want to call it. So he said, but we can't intermingle with you. We can't become one people because you're uncircumcised. And the people of Shechem, everybody knows about the Abrahamic family. Very prestigious family. Yitzchak, remember, still lived in the land of Canaan. Yitzchak was very wealthy and very, very famous. So he said, listen, what do we got to do? We just got to have a little circumcision, a little operation. It says, this family is a small family where we will sort of envelop them, and their wealth will become our wealth. Yaakov, we know from last week, was very wealthy. So they all circumcise themselves. Now, text 1a, what happens? It was on the third day of the after the operation. And Shimon and Levi. So Ruvain is number 1. Shimon and Levi are 2 and 3. Boys number 2 and 3. They get their swords and they go into the city and they wipe out the entire city, or every male in the entire city. Now when they come home, Yaakov is very upset. Yaakov says, it's true that the land of Canaan was promised to our family, but that's later on. Now you're going to incite the entire population upon us, because people are going to think that we're trying to take over the land now. You're putting the whole family at risk. He's very upset. Text 1b, we see Shimon and Levi answer, what, you think we're going to let our sister be treated this way? What, they're going to violate our sister and then they're going to pay us? Absolutely not. That's the story. And actually what happens is that, if you look at the Medrash, by the way, I invite everyone to read the Medrash in this week's parasha. It's fascinating. Because the neighboring towns did attack. And Yaakov and his sons did have to defend the family. And thank God they were blessed with incredible strength, because they sort of single-handedly fought back the entire tribe. It's great. Anyway, it's just interesting how we are always used to thinking about a Jew meek and pushover, and Yaakov and his sons were anything but. Okay, so we'll get the simple question out of the way, because the subject of today's class is not how could they do it. That's not what we're talking about here. So we see text figure 1. There's a whole thing over there. So, I jumped the gun over here with the slideshow. We're not up to that. But figure number 1, you see what justification did Shimon and Levi have to destroy the whole city of Shechem. So Maimonides says that the people of the city were accomplices because they saw it, they didn't stop it. Nachmanides says that they were already guilty of other crimes. They needed punishment. The Or HaChaim said that the original plan was only to kill Shechem, but the people tried to stop them, and that's when the fight broke out. And the last one, Yaakov Tzvi Mecklenburg says that the people reneged on their covenant of the bris, and that's what happened. Okay, so obviously Shimon and Levi go and wipe out a whole city. You think of them, they had to be trained SEAL Team 6 fighters and with many years of combat experience. It's kind of like in the movies, the superheroes surrounded by a bunch of guys. They have all these machine guns and he has the pistol, and all of a sudden, they can't hit, but he's like, hits at every shot and he kills everybody, right? But how old do you think Shimon and Levi were?
13 and 14.
13. They're both 13. The tribes were born very close together. No, they both were 13. Not the same birthday. Like my Sarah and Chaya are 11 months apart, so they were also like 11 months apart.
Oh, gotcha.
Talk about being fruitful.
Oh yeah. Yaakov knew he was going to Haran to have the tribes. He didn't waste time. So text number 2, we see the Gemara says that this is Gemara in Nazir that says that when is a boy called a bar mitzvah? At 13. Where do we find that a boy is bar mitzvah and is obligated to do the mitzvahs? From the story. Why? Because in the verse, if you pay close attention to text number 1, it said each man took a sword. So he's called a man at 13. So that's how we know a boy is called a man at 13. Okay, so multiple questions, obviously. Numero uno. Oh, I went too far. Okay, the questions are not here. All right, sorry. So the question number 1. We all know 13-year-olds. That's maturity? No, obviously not.
Not
No.
from my experience.
Number 2. The whole
Willfulness.
what?
Willfulness.
Yeah.
That's definitely.
You start. Maybe that's the age you start taking your parents' car.
13?
Yeah. Question number 2. It depends. Question number 2. Question number 2. I didn't say I did.
No.
Not a 13.
Which one of your brothers
Not a
did
13.
it?
Not a 13. Question number 2. Guys, it's being recorded. Come on. Question number 2.
Well, my thing is, when Mendy does it, he better not give him.
No, not at 13. Question number 2. Bar mitzvah is a very nice thing. We have a whole nice party. It's all about doing mitzvah, Torah, acts of kindness. But a lot of times, by bar mitzvah, there's a mitzvah project, right? The humanity and everything else. Where do we learn this whole thing from? Shimon and Levi, wiping out a whole city. You couldn't find a less violent, nicer, fluffier event to learn it out from? Seems a little bit,
Gruesome?
yeah,
Yeah.
right. How do I know you're ready to open a bank account? Because when I was your age, I wiped out an entire city, right? I see the correlation. Number 3, we see in history that the Gentile world kind of follows the Jewish philosophy. Look at humanity now, ethics and all that. It trails behind the Torah. But somehow, this concept of 13 is exclusively a Jewish idea. You don't find any other nations of the world that adult becomes 13. Okay,
But the Muslims circumcise their kids at 13?
that's nothing to do with adulthood. That's because Ishmael, their forefather, was circumcised at 13.
Okay, so there's no connection.
No. Okay. So let's talk about bar mitzvah. So before we start talking about bar mitzvah, we have to preface it with a joke. Guy walks into a shul and says, "I want you to bar mitzvah my dog." So the rabbi says, "Your dog?" Guy says, "Rabbi, the dog is a member of the family. It's very important. Please bar mitzvah my dog." It can't be done. So, Rabbi, if you do it, I'll give a $100,000 donation to the synagogue. You didn't tell me your dog was Jewish, right? So let's talk about bar mitzvah. What happened at 13? Why did we start at 13? So there's an interesting concept. I don't know where I read it. That when babies are born, they're born with the hands closed. Why are they born with the hands closed? Is because when a baby, a kid, life is all about them. Life totally revolves around them. Mm-hmm. When does a person begin to think about outside of them? At 13. Look at text number 3. Where are we? The process of maturation, the long journey, takes several years to complete, but the journey begins at this age. Where are we? Text number 3. Okay. So the Rebbe said like this: the commandments become obligatory at the age of 13 because that is when we start maturity. We reach maturity in terms of understanding and empathy. So the concept of empathy, meaning at 13 or 12 for girls, because we know, we'll get into the scientific in a second, the girls mature earlier. On a side note, I don't know if I mentioned this, but there was a talk I heard, NPR, I forgot what it was. This guy was saying that there's a big problem that, it used to be the girls didn't go to college because girls meant to go to the kitchen and all that kind of thing. Mm-hmm. But then that changed. The percentage of girls, then it was 50-50. And now there's so many more girls going and graduating from college, and boys are falling behind. So one of the things he said was very interesting, is that boys mature slower than girls, developmentally. So you're putting a 13-year-old girl and a 13-year-old boy, it's not fair. He's a year behind. So what you should really do is the 12-year-old girls should be with 11-year-old boys. Should be with the 13-year-old boys.
Get it straight.
The 12-year-old girls.
That's part of that maturity.
The 12-year-old girls should be with the 13-year-old boys. This way, developmentally, they're equals. And then he said it'll balance out the college problem. It's a very interesting theory. We treat boys and girls as equals in school, but they're not. I mean, anyone who has boys and girls knows that boys, by
Boys are flakes.
Yeah, at 3 years old, my daughters were doing a bunch of things. My boys were still running around in diapers and fire trucks. It's a whole different. Okay, so at 13, we begin to have this concept of empathy, to think something outside of ourselves, that we're not the center of the universe. And the 5th Chabad Rebbe expands upon this. So when the Torah speaks of maturity in this context, it's talking, doesn't mean maturity. Obviously, maturity doesn't mean, oh, you're 13. Here, take the keys to the Lexus. You know what I'm saying? Oh, you're 13, grab a rifle, go to war. That's not what the Torah means by maturity. Obviously, 13 is not mature. What it means is the ability to empathize. The Torah isn't looking for intellectual prowess, but for emotional intelligence. and he says that, and I went the wrong way, and here, the text of the Rebbe Rashab, Shalom Deber, and he says like this: to empathize is to really know. You can have an understanding of what it is, but you're unable to experience it emotionally. For example, wise children, they could understand money, and they could be sharp, intellectually sharp and honest. This, however, they don't experience it emotionally. This is because children lack the ability to really know, because they don't have a connection to it. They can know it; it's sort of abstract. But it's the same applies to worldly affairs such as wealth and power. Children might be smart; they might understand wealth and power, but they aren't attached to it. They don't have the same relationship with money as that adults do. Same thing on the other side. Children might understand the problems associated with lowliness and poverty, but they aren't distressed by such problems. They don't feel the same as adults do. So we see that when does a person start having the ability to think outside themselves? At 13. So to tell a kid who's under 13 or a girl under 12 to do something that doesn't necessarily for yourself, it's for someone else, they don't think that way. You can only start commanding them to do actions that relate to someone else when they can think outside themselves. And that's why, when do they have the obligation to do Torah mitzvahs? At 12 and 13. And this is what the Rebbe explains in text 4b. He says, children lack the ability to perceive and feel how precious and valuable a mitzvah is, and how we lose when we fail to observe the divine commandments. So if they don't appreciate what a mitzvah is, we're not going to give them the commandment, right? So why are kids so carefree? Because they don't realize the results of their actions, right? Everything's okay. It's only when they realize how their actions impact them, like fire hot kind of thing, then that we can give them responsibility to do commandments and all that. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. Questions? Good? Fine? All right. So we said the bar mitzvah is the ability to think to think abstractly, right? To think outside yourself. It doesn't mean you'll be able to control all your impulses and your emotions. So let's look at the story of Shimon and Levi, right? Shimon and Levi, what happens? Their sister was violated. So they care about, not themselves, they care about someone else. That's what happened here. That's why 13. Now, how they handled the situation, maybe it wasn't the best thing to do, as we see Yaakov gets upset. But the ability to feel Dinah's pain, it was their sister. It's interesting that Dinah's called Shimon and Levi's sister, even though she's the sister of Reuven and Yehuda and Yisachar and Zevulun, full sister, obviously half sister to the rest, but they share Leah as the mother, and obviously Yaakov as the father. Why is she called the sister of Shimon and Levi? Because Shimon and Levi were the ones that felt her pain the most and went to defend her. So that's what we learn out. Shimon and Levi is 13, because that's where maturity begins. That's where a person has the ability to start thinking of about outside themselves. So you might be saying, "Thank you, Rabbi, very nice, but you're a religious man, and it just says it in the Torah, but we weren't raised like you in Brooklyn. You believe everything." So let's look at science, okay? Because actually, what the Torah says is backed up by science. Just one caveat: we don't believe it because science confirms it. We believed it the whole time. Just it's nice that science, found the words or found the studies. So we're going to do a few texts over here. So that science tells us that at the age of around that age, we have the ability to think outside of ourselves and the ability to think and to care about someone other than ourselves. Okay, so text 5a is on page 144. You see this. Obligated is to feel the gravity and importance. We need to learn how to feel. Okay, we need the empathy. All right. Today's leading psychologists assert that children can become capable of abstract thought and empathy as they enter their teens. In other words, this ancient Torah is echoed by modern psychology. Okay, so text 5a, the notion that a shift in child's development occurs around the age of 12, with popular models of developmental psychology. One notable example is the work of Janet Piaget.
Jean Piaget.
Oh, sorry, Jean Piaget, sorry. I was trying to figure out if it's a French name, and I brought the ET over to yeah. So Jean Piaget. I feel more intellectual when I say it like that. mapped out 4 stages of a child's cognitive development. He called the final stage, beginning around the age 11, the formal operational stage, while children in early years mostly use inductive reasoning, drawing general conclusions from personal experience. At this age, at 11, they become capable of deductive reasoning, drawing specific conclusions from abstract concepts using logic. While children tend to think very concretely and specifically in earlier stages, around the age of 12, they become capable of abstract thought and begin to consider possible outcomes and consequences of actions. Further, let's continue text 5b. A parallel of Piaget's work in the field of cognitive development is Lawrence Kohlberg's work on moral development. So the first study told us that they developed this ability to think abstractly. Now the text 5b teaches us about this moral development. Kohlberg found that until adolescence, children are motivated primarily by self-interest. What's in it for me? So they were rewarded for good behavior and punished for bad. As children enter adolescence, they become more concerned about maintaining relationships and take other people's perspectives and intentions into account when making decisions. They also begin to conform to social standards of behavior and understand right from wrong. So here we see science has backed it up, that at this age, at 11, 12 years old, is the stage where kids begin to think outside themselves and what's proper, not because I'm going to hit on the wrist, because it's just not the right thing to do. Now, furthermore, text 6 goes a little bit further. Text 6 says, it's a little hard to read, there's no white background, I'm sorry, but you'll find it in your book. Text 6 says that this change is not only noticed in behavior, there's actually a sociological change. There's a physical change that happens that makes the psychological changes possible. And neurologists have noticed and have charted this change. And there's a lot of scientific terms here. Text number 6, I'll read it. Throughout childhood and into adolescence, the cortical areas of the brain continue to thicken as neural connections proliferate. In the frontal cortex, gray volumes peak at approximately 11 years in girls and 12 years in boys. Right? Again, talking about the year different, 11 and 12, right? Reflecting dendritic overproduction. Subsequently, rarely used connections are selectively pruned. So basically what we're saying is that in the beginning, the body is just taking in information, just taking in. A kid experiences, just around 11, 12 years old, the body says, okay, I'm not using this information. Take it and put it into the recycling bin, just toss it. Now, by doing that, it makes the brain more efficient because it's not overloaded with, it's like your window, you have your computer, you have a bunch of windows open at the same time. The brain is closing down.
Overstimulated.
Right. So in order for the brain to work more efficiently, it tosses away what it's not using. Neural connections that survive the pruning process become more adept at transmitting information through myelination. Myelin, if I'm mispronouncing it, sorry. A sheath of myelin, a sheath of fatty cell material wrapped around neuronal axons, acts as insulation for neural connections. This allows nerve impulses to travel throughout the brain quickly and efficiently. That facilitates increased integration of brain activity. So here we see that why are we giving kids the mitzvahs at 12 for girls and 13 for boys? Because now they have the ability, not just we noticed it emotionally, but we see it in their actual physical makeup of the brain. Now they have the ability to make decisions quicker, to realize the results of their actions, and the moral responsibility and implications of their actions. Just interesting to note, that scientists are always running around trying to deny God. And here you see the way Hashem created a person's brain. It's so perfect. You want one of the best proofs that God exists. There has to be a creator. Sometimes I watch Neil deGrasse Tyson, and he's trying to deny God. But if you listen to him, I mean, he once said, if the earth was a little bit this way, we'd freeze. This way, it'd melt. It's exactly where it has to be. Totally accidental. Right? It's almost like you're baking a cake and it tastes delicious. How did that happen? I don't know. Accident. All right. Okay, so now
If he's right, we'd all be living on a different planet that did have those conditions.
Exactly. Yeah. Okay.
Then we'd all be aliens.
Yeah.
Maybe we are the aliens. So now we can understand. Now we understand why the mitzvahs.
If that's the case, then they're building a wall to keep us in or to keep us out.
Yeah, there you go.
You're missing the biggest fallacy of them all. We're not in charge. The bloom in our gut is in charge. We're just the vehicle for carrying all these things around.
Yes.
Okay. Tomorrow night, science fiction. Okay. So, so now we understand why the mitzvahs were given to a girl at 12 and a boy at 13. We see that's when they're developing morally and ethically and abstractly and the brain, everything's nice. Okay. So we see it all, but we couldn't find a nicer event. Such a bloody and violent event. Why do we learn Bar Bas Mitzvah from such an event? So let's look at the Rosh. The Rosh, Rabbi Ben Yechiel, is a very great rabbi. He actually started as an Ashkenazic rabbi. Then he became a rabbi of a Sephardic community. Very, very interesting story. He didn't become Sephardic. He Ashkenazed Sephardic. So he says like this. He says, by the way, who said that we learned out 13 from Shimon and Levi? Not true. We learned it out because that's what Moses told us. Text number 7. He says, so you should know the ruling that God gave Moses on Mount Sinai was passed down orally through generations. For God taught Moshe a minimum measure for every requirement of the law. Right. So, and everything doesn't measure. Right. We know with milk and meat 1 in 60. Tefillin have to be a certain size. Mezuzah, everything has to be, right? Torah, you think the columns, the lines on a Torah scroll, you think it's random? There's a maximum and a minimum, right? And
What's milk and meat? 160.
one in 60. Meaning if a little bit of milk falls into a pot of meat,
Yeah,
what happens to the pot of meat?
it's gone.
No. So if there's 60 times the meat against the milk, then you can eat it.
Oh, okay.
60 to 1.
Well, yeah, it could be milk to meat to milk, whatever it is, yeah. And there are a bunch of different ratios in kashrus. I mean, there's also arla and truma, whatever, different ratios. But it doesn't say that.
Just as a supposition, if I eat a hamburger, okay, and I put a very small piece of cheese on
No,
it.
you can't do it on purpose. It's a mistake.
It's gotta be like an
It
accident.
has to be an
Yeah.
accident, yeah, okay. A piece of cheese
The
accidentally falls on it.
the rabbis already thought of you, Larry. The rule in Shulchan Aruch, Ein mevatlin Isra lechatchila. You can't purposely nullify a.
What if I'm carrying it and I accidentally trip?
Well, if
What if he thinks it's a veggie burger and puts it on mine?
it's a
Enough.
It's okay. You can't eat it.
it's nullified. If it's nullified, you can't taste it. By the way, if you can taste it, by the way, then it's not nullified.
Make a Boca
okay.
burger cheeseburger.
What?
Boca burger it would be a cheeseburger because it's not meat to start with.
Yeah.
I have no idea what you guys are talking about.
Okay. You know, there's the
Impossible meat?
vegetarian.
Yeah.
Impossible
Yeah.
meat. Can you put cheese on an impossible
I
meat
just
burger?
Yeah.
had one at Cafe
Top.
Noir Friday.
So I'll tell you a
But
story.
there is always the possibility of someone misunderstanding
Oh.
that's a
So-
vegetable burger. and
So
thinks
actually,
it's a
Larry's
cheeseburger.
bringing up a very good point. So whenever you do that, you have to put a hecker. A hecker means a sign that this is power of cheese or power of meat. You can't just sit down to have a piece some meat, for example, and a cup of milk. You can't. You're not allowed to. You have to put it, even though you know it's almond milk or oat milk. You have to put the bottle. I'll tell you a story. They used to sell this soy milk. I think it was chocolate soy milk. It tasted like real chocolate milk, real thing.
Yeah.
So I said, and it had vanilla. That had one chocolate was delicious. I think it was called Eighth Continent. I don't know if they're still around. Anyway, so one time I decided I'm not sure if it was chicken or meat. I want to have it with it, because all the Gentiles do it. Yeah, I want to see. So I had the chicken or meat, whatever it is, and I had the bottle, like all the requirements. I put the piece of meat. I took a drink. I'm like, can't do it. It just all my bells, wrong. I spit it out. I couldn't. Even though I didn't break any law, it just didn't work. Okay. So actually, one of the beauties of Chassidus, and this is really one of the Rebbe's approaches, is to find a balance in two opinions. That really the two opinions are not arguing; they're just talking about two sides to one coin. Same thing here. So you have one opinion that says that 13 is bar mitzvah because that's the age of mental maturity. Another one says God said so, and that's all. And they really seem like totally opposite opinions. Because one is all about logic, and one's all about faith. Which one is it? You both can't be right. You know something? You're also right. So actually, they represent two approaches to serving Hashem, two modalities. One approach is what it's called in Hebrew Kabbalah Sale. Kabbalah Sale means acceptance to the yoke. God says, you do. No questions asked. God says, do it. Another one is you have to try to understand as much as possible. So which approach is better? Yes. Let's look at what the Rebbe says. This is a talk the Rebbe gave on this week's parsha, page 148. The two opinions about the starting point of your obligation to worship Hashem represent two entry points into divine worship. According to the first opinion, worship should begin from a standpoint of reason and knowledge, right? 13 is the age of mental maturity. The ability to serve God this way depends on the state of our intellectual and emotional maturity. Thus, we become obligated to perform mitzvahs when we are mature enough to intuit the meaning of mitzvahs and relate to them emotionally. According to this opinion, it follows that the portal to divine worship is reason and knowledge. The second opinion is that a 13-year-old accepts the yoke of mitzvahs in obedience of a divine edict related to Moshe on Har Sinai. According to this opinion, it follows that the portal to divine worship is discipline and obedience. So each one has something that the other one doesn't. If you worship God out of blind obedience, it's great. You're doing everything you're supposed to, but there's no emotional connection to it. No passion, because I just do it. I don't really care. He said it. It's good enough for me.
Supposed to do it.
Right. Then you're not really involved in it. Without obedience, then you can start legitimizing, maybe in this situation, I don't have to do it. Like some people approach kosher that way. Oh, we don't have to keep kosher because in the old days there was no refrigeration or slaughter, whatever it is, or you don't have to ritually slaughter the animals because this and that, or pick or Shabbos. In the old days, workers work 7 days a week, so God commanded they should take a day off. But now, pick a mitzvah. People have tried to explain it away. But there are sometimes that our commitment has to be we do the mitzvah no matter what. The truth of the matter is that's the basis. No matter how much you understand, and no matter how much it makes sense for you to think about all the reasons why you shouldn't do the mitzvah. Our approach is, my kid's trying to call me, doesn't get the point, he's trying to call again. Our approach is that we do the mitzvah no matter what. And this is what the previous Rebbe was trying to stress to the Jewish people in Russia. In text number 9, now you have to realize this was written in the early 1900s in communist Russia, when the whole attitude was that Judaism, religion, we're all one, and religion promotes difference between one and the other, so it goes against communism. And Judaism is from the old times. Now we're becoming modern. So there was a very tremendous pressure upon Jews of all ages to totally forego their Jewish observance. So to the previous Rebbe says like this: intellectual Jews today must set aside their deductions and refuse to follow the reason and knowledge. I don't care what your logic says. This is because that they are liable to stray, God forbid, by following the prevailing culture of our time and place. And and conclude that we must change our practice. With time, this can cause them to stray completely from the right path. Because I think one of the things the 20th century has shown us, that you could legitimize anything. Once you decide on the right path, then everything's,
So we should get rid of the Constitution.
100%.
Exactly.
I'm not sure.
Well, I don't know about that Second Amendment thing.
I
though.
don't think so.
I know. Something, let's leave it.
Let's just keep the
Yeah.
Constitution.
We must therefore be fiercely determined, even to the point of self-sacrifice, not to stray even an iota from the code of Jewish law. The Torah is eternal to every era and epoch, and we must stand firm and never feel shame before those who mock us. So our attitude got to be. Oh, there goes my light. Next week. I got to remember to bring a different one. I charge this entire day. Which says it just comes to show you if there's a reason why it was free, right? Promos. So our attitude has to be that God commanded it, we do it. Everyone says that it's old age and it's a new time and all these other things. We do it. We don't care. We don't care what your attitude is, what your answer is going to be. Now the question is, where does such an attitude come from? To totally disregard what everyone's saying, and even though their arguments are totally logical, right? Why it's better not to be in Chas v'Shalom, God forbid, and they can come with very convincing arguments. And as they say in Yiddish, can red and hein bis morgen. They can talk from today till tomorrow, or talk themselves blue in the face and say, "You're right. You could be 100% right, but you're wrong. Everything you're saying makes sense, but you're still wrong." What kind of ridiculous thing? Where does that come from? So that comes from, Alter Rebbe explains, it comes from the godly soul. Because every person is made up of the human soul, which is natural. But the Jewish people have something additional, which is called the godly soul. Now, the godly soul is transcendental. It doesn't go by the rules of nature. So a Gentile comes to you and says, you got to do A, B, and C, and it's very logical and natural and normal to do that, and you say, you spoke beautifully. I don't care. Where does that come from? That comes from the godly soul. Now, when does the godly soul fully enter a person? See, the human soul enters when a person's born, right? He's a human from the beginning. But the godly soul enters in stages. It enters fully when a girl turns 12 and a boy turns 13. Text number 10, the Alter Rebbe says, it says the primary and final state of the sacred soul's entry into the body is the age of 13 for a boy and 12 for a girl. And this is why the Torah gave us a commandment at that age. So it's the ability for us to surrender to a higher power. So society says you got to do, especially teens today, on TikTok and Instagram and all the other. I'm sure I'm missing out something that the kids are on. I said you got to do this and you got to do that. Where does the Jewish kid have the fortitude to disregard all the societal pressures, and even as an adult, obviously, and to say I'm going to do something because God says so, something greater than myself? That comes from the godly soul. Now we have two things that happen at Bar Mitzvah. Here we are. There are two things that happen at Bar Mitzvah. Number one, we have the arc of development. Now we begin to have the maturity to think abstractly outside of ourselves. And the second thing happens, our godly soul enters into us in its fullest capacity, and we have the ability to surrender to a higher power. So there's two opinions. We said earlier that one is 13 because it's maturity, and 13 because that's the way God said it. They're not arguing. They're just talking about two sides to one coin. Everything makes sense? Yes?
Yeah, clear as mud.
No, you're confused?
No.
So why say clear as mud? Is that a hick?
Just to be contrary.
Okay.
Just to give you something to fight against.
All right. Yeah. I don't know if that's a hick way of saying,
Yes, it is.
My cousin was once telling me he went to go to small towns to find Jews. I think I forgot which state. Walks into a store. Guy says, "What can I do you for?"
Yes.
He's like, "I don't."
My people.
It's like,
At least $1.75.
but he's looking at him blank. He's like, "So where are you from?" I said, "New York." "What can I do for you?"
What can I do you for?
Right?
My
Hey, but-
father used to say that all the time.
Yeah, but we grew up, in the center of the world. You didn't realize when you grew up in New York City, the whole world exists. It's an abstract concept. There's New York City, and there's
That was it.
New York City is a world
We
unto
came-
itself.
yeah.
When we came down here in '56, my dad and my grandfather drove the car down. My mom and I and my sister, we flew down. So they were driving, clothes, dishes, pots and pans, stuff that they packed up in the car. Huh?
It was you? I
Every-
got the same story.
Yeah, every place where they pulled in for breakfast, if they pulled in for breakfast, the waitress would come up, ask, "What do you want?" My grandfather would say, "I want a boil of oatmeal."
Oatmeal.
Oatmeal. What?
Yeah. They couldn't.
He didn't learn grits yet.
No, he didn't learn grits.
Yeah.
Funny you should say that because I came down here about the same way. My father and I flew down, and the rest of my family, my mother and one of my sisters, and aunts and uncles and grandparents, they drove down in a big station wagon.
Horse and wagon.
Before. Yeah.
Horse and wagon.
This
Yeah.
was this was around the mid-50s.
Well, horse and wagon. Yeah.
Same thing.
Yeah. Anyway. Okay. So now let's get into the second question. Why this story? Right. This story seems like a very negative story, but one of the knacks the Rebbe had was, and Chassidus in general does this, but especially the Rebbe's specialty. He would take a story in the Torah that seems very wild, a negative, misunderstood, and present it in a new light. So here it looks like Shimon and Levi flew off the cuff, right? They totally lost their cool, and they went crazy and just wiped out. And I learn once a week these two brothers, and we did the book of Joshua. We're not doing the book of Judges. We're not doing the story of Samson. You read the book of Samson, which I'm sure Stan Lee got the concept of the Incredible Hulk from, right? Guy goes crazy and just starts smashing stuff. I'm trying to explain to them that that's not Shimshon. Shimshon's a holy person, and everything had a purpose. Shimshon is one of the most misunderstood characters in there. This story also, Shimon and Levi, right? Just went in, guns blazing, and what's that line from? I'm going to go into town, whipping and kill every firstborn. Too Jewish.
Too Jewish.
What was that again?
I'm going to go into town, whipping and wailing, and I'll kill every firstborn. Yeah, too Jewish.
Okay.
Right. Okay, so let's learn the Rebbe's take.
Blazing Saddles, or was that? Yeah, that was Blazing Saddles, or History of the World.
I think so. Let's learn the Rebbe's
No
take.
books, no matter what.
Blazing sound.
So he's text number 11, page 151. It's a lengthy text, but it's a very good one. The concern when Shimon and Levi answer Yaakov, "Will our sister be made into harlot?" was so distressing to Shimon and Levi that they responded like strangers, like people who were not the sons of Yaakov, because Yaakov was a docile, calm guy, nice guy, and Shimon and Levi went totally wacko, not like Yaakov. But they were so consumed by distress over the violation of their sister that their only choice was each man took up the sword. This is precisely why we derive the age of Bar Mitzvah from this passage. This is the crux here. It is a message for every person, every Jew, Bar Mitzvah, which includes all Jews at the beginning stages of our spiritual progression. The lesson is like this. We're saying Shema. We stray after our hearts and eyes, or with lustful urges, and are tempted to sin. We risk what happens when a person sins. Just like when a person is unfaithful, they become separated, and there's a wedge between the one spouse and the other. So too, sin creates a wedge and a separation, God forbid, between a Jew and God. When we're confronted by such temptations, and rationally it makes all the sense to do it, but we shouldn't tolerate. Just like Shimon and Levi weren't thinking, they were totally consumed by the injustice. What happened to their sister? That they went and took action. Our only response can be stubborn resistance to sin, even to the point of self-sacrifice. Only after being inspired to self-sacrifice do we have the luxury of serving God in a fashion that follows our reasoning and a measured pace of the Torah's dictates. However, for our reasoned service to God to endure, our first approach has to be stubborn determination. I don't care. This is what it is. So especially a kid turns 12, 13, and more in today's kids, and it was more, and it was less when I was a kid and less when you guys were kids. But that age, you're very distracted by what's going on in the world. In these days, it's a world of distraction, and it makes every sense why. Kid has to know that you got to do the right thing because it's the right thing. I don't care what you think. This is the right thing to do, and you got to be stubborn about it, and not get into conversations. Some of the times, with adults, we get a little tentative, right? Many times in Chabad, you see little kids, 13, the hat, is over their ears, and they're going over to these adults who want to put on tefillin. We would get a little embarrassed, shy, meek. They don't care. They're told to ask. They go and they ask, because you get this from Shimon and Levi. When it's the right thing to do, or you're consumed by the injustice of the wrong thing to do, you lay off. You don't do it.
Yeah, I saw those guys at Sadras Mall a couple of weeks ago.
That's right.
They took one of the vendors there who was obviously Jewish, because he had his yarmulke on, and they made him put on his tefillin.
Exactly. That's it. So it turns out that the perfect age.
He came in and said, "You're putting on tefillin?" When they said, "Would you
We're
like
going to
the
close down your kiosk.
Right.
Would
We'll
you
start,
like the
we'll
parole?"
start doing Hava Nagila
They
around
said they
the
did.
kiosk.
I don't know if that word was the proper word in that sentence.
So it turns out that the perfect age to become a mitzvah is 13. Why? Because that's when you begin to have mental maturity, and you have this dedication where you don't understand. I'm just going to do it. I'm impetuous, stubborn, and I'm just going to do it. Now let's get to the last question. We're getting close to our time limit.
You got 10 more minutes.
Okay, let's get to our last question. How come this is only a Jewish thing?
How come this went?
There's only a Jewish thing. The whole 13 becoming adult. But obviously, we don't let a 13 drive. We don't let a 13 vote. We don't let 13 fight. We don't let them do anything.
Depending on what state they're in, they can get
They're too
married.
busy learning.
Right.
Well, they used to also be like, they weren't Jewish, but there were some tribes in Africa that when a boy reached a certain age, he had to go and hunt down something and.
Because they were dead at 20. Through either killing the lion or the lion was doing the killing. But this concept. So the Rebbe has. I read this answer. I love this answer. To me, it was very, very, very interesting. Okay, and the Rebbe says, text number 12. The Jewish children reach maturity at 13, unlike everyone else. Why? Because we're unlike everyone else. How does it work, everyone else? Everyone else, the other people. So by first, they have a common land. And then they appoint a king. And then they have laws, right? American people, they lived in the land, they got together, made laws, got some president, and a constitution. The Jewish people are totally opposite. They left Egypt, what's the first thing they did? Laws. Then they were still in the desert. Then it began to follow the Torah. Then this was the foundation, the portal into nationhood. And then later they got the land, and later they got the king. But the laws was the first thing. This is why Jews don't enter adulthood when they're 20 or strong enough to defend the land, rather by the age of 13, when they're mature enough to understand. So if adulthood was about physical prowess, right, the ability to fight, or full mental capacity, ability to vote, or to interact in business without getting cheated, then yeah, you probably have to wait till 18, 20, 21, whatever the age. But our whole belief and creed was formed based according to the Torah, the loyalty to Torah, and the age a person can begin to have this. They say in Yiddish, Übergegebenkeit. Übergegebenkeit means given overness, dedication to something greater than him or herself, begins at the age of 13. So Jewish people were backwards. Everyone goes this way, and we go that. Maybe that's why we read right to left. Right?
Yeah, we read right to left because of the hammer and chisel.
Right.
That makes sense.
Yeah, because you want to be able to see what you
What you were
Yeah.
writing at the time.
That's why we read right to left. That's not
Yeah,
right.
no, because your right hand holds the hammer, okay? Your left hand holds the chisel.
I understand.
If you're carving the letters, your left hand is in the way.
That's
if
not-
If you're going this way,
So you really think that's why Torah goes right to left? No.
that's the only logical reason is because your hand. is
We
the way
learned
you
today,
said it.
just because there's a logical reason doesn't mean that's the reason. It means a logical reason buttresses what we already have. The Lashon HaKodesh, the language of the Torah, precedes the world. It says God spoke, let there be a world. That means the language preceded it.
Okay,
So Lashon HaKodesh, the Hebrew tongue, the holy tongue of the Torah, precedes the creation of the world. So let's finish off with a story, a bar mitzvah story. So this guy says a story that he's a French citizen, and his parents weren't very religious before the war, and during the war, he and his brother were sent to hide in a Christian orphanage. Then they were reunited with their parents after the war. They lived in Paris, but they weren't really religious. Not more religious after the war. Before it was the same. It's coming time for his bar mitzvah, and his grandmother really wanted him to have a bar mitzvah. He wasn't really interested, but his grandmother wanted it, so they found a shul, wasn't too far away, and they arranged a bar mitzvah. And something turned on. He started coming to more classes, and he decided he was going to go to school, and he went to a Chabad yeshiva in Israel, which was in Lud. Lud is a city next to Tel Aviv. That's really where the airport is. It's really Lud,
Yeah.
right? Actually, the old airport was in Lud proper. It's called
they
Lud.
called it Lud.
They called it Lud, yeah. And then he became a Chabad guy, a chassid, and he married. He lived in Kfar Chabad. Now, one time there was the Farbringen, and I think the guy who was by the Farbringen, his rabbi, his name was Sudakovich, something like that. Yeah. I'm very bad with names. Sorry, Maria. Anyway, so
That's okay, George.
all right. So he's taught. So Rabbi Sudakovich is telling a story. When the Rebbe's mother got out of Russia in 1947, I think it was, and came to Paris, the Rebbe took a boat from New York to Paris to escort her to bring her to the United States. So he says, one day the Rebbe tells me and a friend, I want you guys to walk around Paris. Walk around their neighborhood because you're dressed like a Jew. Payas and yarmulke and a beard and hat and jacket. The people should see that they're still Jews, and they're still Jews who are proud Jews. And he says, you no idea what happened. One day I'm approached by this, and we're walking on the street. A lady calls up from the window, says, 1 second. She comes down. She comes downstairs. Says, I have this grandson who needs a bar mitzvah. And you have any idea what we can do? So sure, there's a shul right here called Rashi Shul, and we'll arrange a bar mitzvah. And they arranged a bar mitzvah, and it was very nice. And he said, can you imagine? The Rebbe had me walking around, and because of that, this kid was bar mitzvah. Whatever. And who knows what happened to him today? The guy goes over and says, which part of Paris was it? And he finds out that he was the kid.
Oh, wow.
He was a kid, and all because of people were stubbornly dedicated to Judaism, and even you can imagine even after the Holocaust and everything else, unwilling to compromise. Someone was returned to their Father in heaven. So we got to be like Shimon and Levi. What's right is right. What the Torah says is Torah, and although so many times society tells us that we're crazy and we're out of date and everything else. So listen here. Been there, done that. We've heard all your arguments. The Romans had arguments. The Greeks had arguments. Everyone has their argument. We know what we keep to the Torah. If it makes sense to you, good. Doesn't make sense to you, also good. That's not. We're not going to compromise. but our dedication to Torah can't just be God said that's enough for me. We have to try to develop a understanding, because with understanding comes love and passion and enthusiasm for Judaism. Any questions?
Did you say something?
No. All right, guys, have a good week, and Mitch Hashem will see you next week.